Okay, hi. For those that don't know me, I'm Karen Rowland. I'm a Town Center Abbey Ward counselor, and amongst my lead member capacities, I'm also the Town's Heritage Champion. So, welcome to this consultation, and I'm really excited talk about one of my favorite subjects and to get feedback, especially from the public, in shaping this document, this SPD, as we call it, and you'll hear it referred to, which is a supplement to our local plan, as Sarah set forward. There's no denying that high streets all over the country have been challenged and are changing. COVID's hastened the number of shop fronts and bricks and mortar shops that have closed in the past year. The great news is, though, is that Reading is largely not as susceptible to the decimation of high streets that we've seen in some other parts of the country. We're buoyed by a very positive economy, and we've never really had quite the problems, but we have noticed that we've had shops closing down, and the face of our high streets, or our radial high streets, and retail shopping centers throughout the town are changing, and we all notice that. So it's really great that the timing is actually just perfect to bring this forward. As we think about high streets, about retail shop fronts and things like that, we need to reflect on where shop fronts are going to be going into the future. And Bill Grimsey, who is the author of the Grimsey Review and a foremost expert on the health of high streets, has stated that high streets need to, in the future, become an activity-based community gathering place, which echoes the key statements made by the Housing, Communities, and Local Government Committee in their High Streets and Town Centers 2030 report that, if you're interested, I'd say is a great report to read. In that, they want us to ensure that our high streets and that those spaces that the retailers take up in our high streets are reflective of the future insofar as providing a space for activity for the community. They need to provide a gathering place for that community to happen, and they need to be future-proofed. In essence, they really need to become a destination. And when we think of destinations, we think of fun, exciting, engaging, attractive, and inviting places. That's why, as I said earlier, introducing this at this time is really quite fortuitous and really sits really beautifully in the way we are thinking about our future post-COVID and the way retailers and shop fronts need to be preparing themselves for the future. Providing a destination is providing an attractive place, and this SPD, we hope that when it is completed, will help to guide that. So this is coming along at a really great time. A clear illustrative SPD around shop fronts is an integral way that local authorities can best ensure the quality and integrity of their retail street fronts and help them to future-proof their site and the area surrounding them. A good SPD provides valuable guidance in determining applications and helping to positively shape the future appearance of our town by being able to more easily work with developers and help them to shape what their shop fronts and what their face of their retail bricks and mortar environment will be. Whilst the guidance for shopfront spans good practical guidance for both new and heritage areas, it follows wisely along with classical principles at its base. Reading is, by its very nature, largely a town with Victorian and Edwardian facades throughout, especially in our high streets and our retail areas. So you'll find probably a lot in this SPD that you think may really closely relate to that. Well, the fact of the matter is that we do have a lot of those areas, and but still the principles are sounded in good classic principles that are good for heritage areas as well as modern areas. And I hope that that people will find that flexibility within this document. I certainly think it's there. Speaking of heritage, though, however, and you'll see a map up here on the front, I want to just mention quickly about our High Street Heritage Action Zones, which is another thing, along with bringing this SPD forward right at this time, has been another fortuitous situation. So our High Street Heritage Action Zones are focused in the areas that you can see there in the black dotted outline. And those are high streets or radial high street areas out of the town center that probably need that a little bit of extra help in future proofing. They're all heritage areas too. And by paying attention to that heritage is the way that they are going to help to future proof those areas for the future. They'll become more attractive, hopefully, and they will become places that are destinations. People will want to be there for activity, for gathering in the community, and for shopping, and those things that a high street really needs to be for the future. So those are two really wonderful things that are happening, and I'm so glad they've come together at this time. I certainly am very eager to listen to any public feedback we can have about this, fine-tuning any of the details, helping to answer any questions if I can. But we need to think about our shop fronts, and in meeting the challenge of the future, that a shop front can really short sell itself and its neighbors if they're not doing the best they can for that. They spend an awful lot on their websites, but if they're still bricks and mortar, they need to be spending and focusing just as much attention on their shop fronts. And this guide should provide an excellent way forward and guidance to help them do that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rowland. As Sarah said, I'm Sally Humphreys. I'm from Purcell, and I'm a heritage consultant. We're sort of advising on the Shopfront design guide, and also providing some architectural works to do with the HAS zones. And in this presentation, I'm going to give you an overview of the content of the design guide, and at the end, let you know how you can provide us with your comments on the document. So the purpose of the design guide for shopfronts is to provide user-friendly guidance on how planning applications affecting shopfronts will be decided. It gives advice about what the key elements of the shopfronts are and what the general design principles should be when planning change. The guide will be used by both owners and occupiers of the shops to understand how best to go about change and making that change sensitive, and also by Reading Borough Council to guide the determination of planning applications. The guide supports and provides further detail for the adopted policies in the local plan, particularly policy OU5, shopfronts and cash machines, and so the two should be read in conjunction with each other. The guide's also timely in providing clear advice on shopfronts for the two High Street Heritage Action Zones at Oxford Road and St Mary's Butts and Castle Street, where funding from Historic England is going to be available to owners to help them improve their shopfronts. And there's also additional guidance in the document for historic and or listed buildings, listed shopfronts where change needs to be carried out in a more thoughtful way. However, the principles of the design guide do apply to all shopfronts across the whole borough. So what are the benefits of physical improvements to the shopfronts? They're listed here and there are many advantages. They include that historic shopfronts features will be preserved or retained or reinstated even. Well-designed shopfronts contribute to a sense of place and enhance vibrancy. Councillor Rowland mentioned fun and sort of excitement, engagement in the area. That leads to increased retail footfall and dwell time. People like to linger in nice places, and that in turn leads to increased profits for shop owners and tenants, and people just generally spend more money in the local economy after there's been investment in the historic environment. Better shopfronts lead to an attractiveness for investment in the area and greater levels of occupancy. There's improved community cohesion and an enhanced sense of civic pride, leading to higher levels of community engagement. Improvements can give more usable floor space and provide higher land values. And lastly, an appropriate mix of uses such as residential, commercial and retail on historic high streets has been found to correlate with better economic outcomes and is proven to be more resilient in times of economic downturn. So in Reading itself, there's a wide variety of shopfronts. Not many early shopfronts survive and a lot have been lost, but however, there are a good range of shopfronts that are historic that do survive, and also good quality modern ones that use traditional design that blend well into the streetscape. Shopfronts in medieval times consisted of a simple door and shuttered windows, which didn't resemble the shopfronts that we know today. So it was in the 17th and 18th century, really, that the familiar elements of shopfronts that we know today began to appear, with their large glazed shop windows displaying goods to the street. So here is a selection of historic shopfronts found in Reading. The top left is an early 17th century building at 2728 Marketplace, and the shopfront itself is 18th century. So the building is currently being renovated, it's under scaffolding, but this photograph shows that it has a space for a central door. The windows are divided by elegant columned pilasters, and there's a stool riser at the base of the windows and a fascia and cornice above. Moving on to the top right, it's a late 18th, early 19th century shopfront at London Street, which has had the glazing altered to be one large pane of glass rather than smaller panes, but it does retain the door, the fine columns either side of the window, and the elegant metalwork above, all in the style of the Georgian period. Bottom left shows a 19th century shopfront from Gun Street. It has a traditional recessed doorway, timber mullioned windows, corbelled pilasters and fascia and cornice above. And lastly is an example of an early 20th century shopfront at 55 to 55A St Mary's Butts, which shows those traditional features previously mentioned, but also demonstrates a sleeker modern style and the use of bronze glazing bars, which were popular at the time. Large department stores were also common in Reading in the later 19th century and early 20th century, with long ranges of windows and sometimes two-storey showrooms. And I'll show you some examples of those later on. And I've used various terms in the previous slide to describe the elements of a traditional shopfront, and the design guide does give more details, but here's an overview of the components if you're not familiar with them. So the diagrams give examples of single and double fronted shop fronts. On both, the whole front's framed by pilasters at each edge, which are topped with a capital and a plinth at the bottom. Above the shop front's a fascia board, which contains the shop name, and this is flanked on either end by a corbel and topped with a moulded cornice. Doors in traditional shop fronts are recessed, often with a tiled entrance floor, and the windows are broken up into smaller areas with timber mullions or glazing bars, and the doors are usually glazed with a fanlight above. And lastly, a stool riser lines the bottom of the window, which helps prevent damage to the glazing and gives a solid visual base to the shop front. And just to note, these examples here are sort of more Victorian in style. They're examples, so there can be some variation in design depending on the age of the shop and the style it's designed in. And here are some photographs showing those elements in real life, with the shop front on the left displaying the recessed entrance door, the tiled entrance, stool riser, mullioned windows, pilasters, corbels and fascia with the cornice above. And to the right, there are more details of moulded cornices and capitals and stool risers that are either in timber or tiles. Another important element of the shop front on the factory on the left is the sensitive incorporation of the door to the flat above the shop. So the one you see straight ahead of you is to the flat above, and there's one to the left which goes into the shop itself. And that means that the front window, the main window of the shop, hasn't been altered with a door inserted in it to access the flat. And these images just give you a bit more of a flavour of some more shop fronts. The image on the top left is a medieval building, and this is just to show really that although the windows have been altered, they're a bit later. The shops in medieval times didn't have that traditional shop front. There was just a more domestic scale window onto the street. The top right's a late 18th, early 19th century shop front. The bottom left's early 20th century with some interesting leaded glazing to the top of the window. And then the bottom right is an example of how shopfront elements were used in a more modern style in the interwar period, with elegant curved glass and tiled stool riser that have more an Art Deco feel to it. Here on the top are some examples of very highly decorative details on 19th century shop fronts, with columns on both, and both showing elegant ways that the shop front turns the corner. and there were often doors on corners of shop fronts as well when they were on a corner site. The bottom row are the examples of larger department stores or shops, which are common in the city centre of Reading. Jackson's there has a long range of windows on the ground floor, and the other two are examples of two-storey showrooms, so denoted by larger glazing on the first floor, which also forms an important part of the shop front. So in the next section, I'll show you some examples of good and bad designs of shop fronts. So we'll look at issues regarding shop fronts, but also show opportunities for what could be done to improve them. Typical principles which need to be considered are listed here, and there are more details in the design guide, and I'll give a few more details now. So good shop fronts retain historic architectural features. They relate well to the scale, proportion and architectural style of the host building and the streetscape. If they have corporate branding, that can be adapted so it's more subtle and it fits better with the historic environment. Good shop fronts also have uncluttered display windows and clear glass glazing. They have a stall riser to form a solid visual base and prevent damage to glass. They have fascia that relates to the scale of the building, that don't block or extend onto other architectural features, and which avoid excessive use of bright colours and have text that's well proportioned. Good shop fronts also provide an accessible entrance as far as possible. They have uncluttered forecourts, use high quality materials and retain original stone or brickwork unpainted. They have retractable canvas canopies and have discrete security measures and lighting. Bad shop fronts, on the other hand, are ill proportioned in relation to the rest of the building. They remove or cover over historic architectural features. They lack mullions and stall risers, creating overly large glazed areas. They have garish, overly bright signage, excessive window posters and advertising that blocks views into and out of the shop. They use poor quality materials like UPVC and plastics, and have canopies which don't retract fully and aren't fully hidden once retractable. They have cluttered forecourts which cause obstruction to pedestrians and have roller shutters which detract from the character of the street. So looking at some of those features in more detail with some examples. Here are some of fascia and signage. On the top row, the applied lettering on the left-hand example is elegant and fits nice and neatly within the timber fascia board. And on the top right, there have been red fascia boards applied to the building, but these still sit within the stone fascia behind with the cornice visible above. And the fascia there are also divided into lengths which match the structural bay of the building, rather than being one long fascia that spans a really long width and doesn't reflect the rhythm of the architecture. On the bottom row, there are fascia that are really oversized and don't fit into the original space left for the fascia, so the proportions of the shop front are harmed and the rhythm of the shop fronts along the streets eroded. They're also very busy with lots of details and often made of plastic materials or even timber floorboards on the one on the right hand side, and they give generally a poor quality and inconsistent appearance. For advertising, the top left is an example of a good window display where the treatments have been applied subtly with an elegant border and a discreet pricing notice, and it still allows good views into the shop and creates an active shop front. On the top right, however, the signage is very garish and obstructs the whole of the window, meaning the shop feels quite closed off. At the bottom, you can see some original timber cornices surviving. One has had a sign intrusively attached to it, and the fascia board behind is very oversized, projecting down below the original fascia panel and the corbel. The barbershops on the top left has a good example of the projecting little barbershop pole that's nicely proportioned to the fascia. For windows and stall risers, the shop on the left shows a good example of timber mullions or glazing bars breaking up the area of glazing, with the stall riser at the bottom creating that solid visual base that mirrors the fascia above. On the right, however, the frameless glazing doesn't provide that anchoring effect that the stall riser does, and it lacks the good proportions of the others. So security is obviously a very important consideration for people, but roller shutters like the one on the right create a very closed off effect, which serves to create this impression of sort of crime and neglect. They're essentially pretty ugly and mean the visual rhythm of the shopfront along the street is disrupted. So more sensitive options could include laminated glass or internal grills like this one on the left, which is an example in Oxford, or demountable grills. Conversions of shopfronts to residential use is something which is becoming more common given modern moves to out-of-town shopping centres, the rise in online shopping, which leaves town centre shops vacant. Where they're converted, shopfronts should be retained as far as possible to ensure the building reflects the character of the area. The example on the top left shows one where the shop is still in use, but the door to the side accesses the flat above, sorry. And that's in a traditional style which matches the door to the shop itself. On the bottom centre, the ground floor has been converted with the shop front retained. A door's been inserted, but it's in a reasonably traditional style. An opaque film has been applied to provide privacy. Ideally, this would be something less permanent, like a curtain or a blind, but at least this example leaves some clear glass at the top of the window. And the third example, bottom left, shows the entrance to the factory, which we saw before, with both the entrances to the shop and the flat set subtly within the recessed entrance area without the need for a new door inserted in the main window area. The two examples on the right, however, have had the shop front almost entirely removed and the character lost. They're domestic style and proportioned windows and doors with no thought to retaining the character which fits into the streetscape. On traditional shopfronts, the typical material is timber, though stone, brick, glazed brick, render, iron or tiles can also be used. High quality materials give it a better appearance, and original facing materials such as brick or stone, particularly often on the upper floors above the shop fronts, should not be painted over. The sustainability of materials should also be considered, such as sourcing timbers from suitably managed forests. The top left shows an example of original brickwork that's been painted over so that the moulded details above the window are therefore obscured. This was probably once a two-tone sort of plaster and brick facade. And also the paintwork's been poorly maintained and added wires and satellite dishes mar the appearance. And the wires and electrical boxes on the photo below show that thought really needs to be given to those sorts of details, which can become particularly unattractive if badly planned or poorly maintained. The plastic materials and aluminium frames of the fascia windows on the examples on the right are a departure from traditional materials and don't have that same richness and quality of appearance that timber, tiles, etc. do. For forecourts, forecourt trading and seating can invigorate the street scene, but must avoid causing obstruction to pedestrians or nuisance to nearby residents. If they're cluttered like the example on the right, that has a negative visual effect, and clutter can also obscure historic shop fronts from view. A more positive forecourt would be one that's uncluttered, clearly delineates the forecourt from the pavement, and provides adequate clearance for pedestrians, free of street furniture like signage and A-boards. A-boards require licensing, and multiple A-boards can cause clutter and obstructions. The example on the left shows a well-presented display on a forecourt, which, though it blocks quite a lot of the main window, presents a much more ordered appearance. Ease of access should be a consideration for any alterations to shop fronts. Ideally, access points should be wide and level if possible, having clearly distinguishable entrance points. There could be visual manifestation on glass, such as opaque decals to highlight the presence of glazing. Wheelchair access that can be achieved without users opening double doors, doors that are easily opened by those with limited strength, and you should avoid automatic sliding doors unless on a large modern shop front. There can be a balance though. The example with the cross is an area where there's a big change in level from the street to the shop door, and putting in a ramp wouldn't be a suitable solution as to achieve the right gradient. It would be excessively long. So other accessibility solutions can be used, such as a handrail, gentle steps and contrasting nosings, which are applied here, but the materiality and appearance could be improved. For example, for historic shop fronts, for example, on a listed building, a more pragmatic approach can also be taken to ensure both reasonable access and the retention of historic interest. A permanent solution, such as building in a sensitive ramp to create level access, is preferred, but temporary ramps like this one on the left could be an alternative solution that would both preserve historic fabric and provide access, provided the temporary ramp isn't just left in position permanently. From the outset of planning works, access should be a priority, and the council will expect to see that applicants have done as much as they can to improve access. For canopies above shop fronts, these are a traditional feature of historic shop fronts. They can be found on lots of historic photos of Reading and other towns. These should be retractable and avoid rigid or curved frames such as Dutch blinds like on the right, which are often still very visible when folded up or don't actually get folded up at all. The materials used should be high quality, such as canvas rather than acrylic or plastic. The colours should complement the design of the shop front and should avoid spanning more than one structural bay. And small hanging signs, like on the photo on the left, may be appropriate if they're not too large, are traditional in character, and are not intrusively fixed to historic architectural features. So here I'm just going to give you a few examples of design proposals or where historic shop fronts have been restored to show you the positive change that can be brought about. So on Oxford Road, some work's already been carried out as part of the High Street Heritage Action Zone to develop proposals for redesigned shop fronts, which would be part funded by Historic England for those building owners who are interested in undertaking the scheme. The image shows numbers 152 to 186 in their current form at the bottom, with many buildings displaying those negative features just outlined. The sketch above shows how traditional shop fronts with stall risers, appropriately proportioned fascia and traditional doors to shops and to the flats above could create a better architectural relationship with the upper stories and provide a more unified visual appearance for the wider streetscape, giving some commonality to designs. This is an example, another HAS example from the Derby Cathedral Quarter of before and after where this has happened. It's been done in conjunction with improved public realm, which is another thing that helps people enjoy the space and linger more. The traditional shop fronts have been restored. The same shops themselves, the businesses are still there, but the elegant lettering to the shop names are on the fascias rather than the garish signage before. And there's a coordinated scheme of more subtle colours, and the historic features of the shop front have been allowed to shine through. Another example is High Road in Leighton, where the council invested in enhancing shops to ensure the valuable community asset was not lost. So we have the before and after here showing the way the traditional shop fronts have been incorporated. And this is a good example where corporate branding such as the Pizza Hut or the KFC have been sort of dialed down and made to sit nicely within the fascia boards. And this is the same project on High Road in Leighton, with some further photographs showing sort of coordinated paint schemes, albeit a much more colourful seaside colour scheme that would be suitable for Reading. Traditional shop fronts added and subtle signage. So what if you want to go about making changes to your shop front? The first thing to do would be to refer to the design guide. This will give you more detail on what changes would be appropriate and where there are opportunities to enhance your property. You'll need to adhere to the guidance as it will be considered by the council when they're determining a planning application. And you'll also need to refer to any relevant policies in the local plan on shop fronts, design, conservation areas and listed buildings as appropriate. Researching your building can help give a steer on how it should look Local archives or libraries may have historic photos of your building or more generally of historic shop fronts in Reading. And if you can find out the date of your property, that'll help to give a steer on what style the shop front should be in. In the early stages of developing proposals, a pre-app inquiry to the planning application can give helpful advice on whether your designs are on the right track and can improve your chances of gaining planning permission without carrying out lots of expensive design work on a scheme which would not be permitted. You'll then have to apply for planning permission with accompanying architectural drawings submitted that include plans, sections and elevations of shopfront, plus showing it in context with the upper floors and adjacent buildings to show it will fit into the street scene. If your building is listed, you'll also need to apply for listed building consent and make sure your proposals are particularly sensitive to the historic environment. You'll need to check if building regulations approval will be needed, and also it's good to check if your building's in the Oxford Road or St Mary's, Butts and Castle Street High Street Heritage Action Zones, as you might be entitled to assistance and funding to make improvements to your shop front. And something else that might be helpful is that we're planning some training sessions on understanding and enhancing heritage on the dates shown on the screen. This will give an understanding of what living in a conservation area means, how to make sensitive repairs to historic buildings, and it will give information on applying for planning permission. And if you'd like to attend, then please email Celine on celine.carson@reading.gov.uk and she will provide you with an invite. We'll have these details later on as well if you want to copy them down. So just a summary here about planning permissions if you aren't able to attend those training sessions. If your building isn't listed, it's a legal requirement to apply for planning permission to change the items listed here, such as removal of a shop front, alterations of doors, windows, frontage lines, changes to materials, repositioning the entrance, changes to the fascia, alterations for accessibility and installation of security measures. Any changes carried out without planning permission may be pursued by planning enforcement, so do check with the council if you're not sure about whether you need to apply or not. Repair work, interior decoration and like-for-like replacement, i.e. work that's carried out with the same materials and techniques that already exist, usually don't need permission, but it's often best to check with the council just in case. But if your building is listed, there are a few more considerations to take into account, so the special architectural and historic interest of the shop is preserved, and you'll need to apply for listed building consent. So consent will be required for some things, additional alterations to the things on the previous page, such as changes to the tiles at the entrance, removal of blinds or blind boxes, installation of extractor fan outlets, painting and alteration to the interior. Planning permissions require fees to be paid, but listed building consents are free. So the next steps, the draft design guide's being consulted on until Friday the 24th of September. There's a link here where you can view the document online. I think it's going to be put in the chat as well. And hard copies can be viewed now at the civic offices and all council libraries. Next Tuesday, we'll be running a drop-in session in an outdoor location in the city centre, where members of the council, High Street Heritage Action Zone officers and myself and other members of Purcell who've been involved in the HAS work will be available to discuss the draft and any questions you have about shop fronts or about the High Street Heritage Action Zone. At the moment, the location is still to be confirmed, but if you'd like to be notified, then you can email Sarah on sarah.burr@reading.gov.uk and she'll send you the details. Responses to the draft design guide for shop fronts can be sent to the email on screen, the planning policy @reading.gov.uk, or by post to the address. Alternatively, there's a questionnaire via the link on the screen that you can fill in to answer specific questions about the design guide. All comments received will be reviewed and taken into account when producing the final draft, which is due for adoption in winter this year. And we look forward to receiving your comments. We've got the contact details up there for Sarah and Celine, the council. You can answer your questions about either the draft design guide, shop fronts or the High Street Heritage Action Zones, if you want to talk to them in more detail about that. However, we're happy to answer more questions now, and we've left the key links and bits of information and contact details there for you, and we've also shared a PDF of that in the links in the chat box if you want to download that for later. So thank you, and any questions? I think there's one there in the chat already.
Yeah,
sure,
hi. It's
yeah.
Evelyn Williams. I put that question up. I think the SPD is really great. I have read it. And I think it's the sort of thing Reading should definitely have. And as I think you said earlier, it builds on the new local plan. What I became a little confused about during your presentation was how this works outside the what you might call the town centre conservation areas or listed buildings, as I live in Catesgrove near Whitley Street, and I know that a lot of the shops on Whitley Street were originally residential properties, and I expect the same is true of other parts of Reading. And so when you say look back at the original features, well, the original feature was actually probably a domestic property with a front garden that has now been taken over by pavement and or an extended shop front. So how does the SPD cater for what might be the more normal kind of shop front issues that we see on our smaller high streets outside conservation areas in non-listed buildings?
Shall I? Oh, go ahead. Okay.
I was just going to... Who wants to go first?
You start, Sally.
I was just going to say that the guidance covers the whole of the borough. So there's a particular section for listed buildings, but all the other guidance applies everywhere to any shop front. But then thought maybe Claire or Sarah could elaborate further.
Yeah, I mean, I've just done a quick Google Earth, I must admit, maps of Whitley Road, because it's not an area I know specifically, but it has a very big overlap with some of the Oxford Road properties we did as part of the High Street has. So we've got sort of late Victorian buildings where the upper floors haven't been changed dramatically, so you can kind of see very much the time of the buildings. We've still got the dormers, a lot of UPVC windows have gone in, a lot of satellite dishes are there, we've got a lot of not great rainwater goods, and along the shop front you can see that what a lot of the original shop features are still there, but have been covered up or modified or changed. And the fascias are kind of, a lot of the principles which Sally's been talking about in terms of fascias have been put on oversized, that the doors, the flat doors, the upper floors haven't been very sensibly put in terms of a late Victorian building. So I think it's about kind of standing back and going, when was this building built? What was this building architecture, sort of the proportions of it, the materiality of it, and looking at the surrounding buildings as well, so that it kind of works together, because they're sort of groupings of buildings as a terrace. It's not an individual property. These buildings work together and these form the streetscape, and their attractiveness is often by their collection in many ways. So where you've got the same things happening, which just as mentioned, is massive plastic signs which spread over several properties, with Whitley Food and Wine Store and a massive glazed door to the properties above it. That's nothing to do with the late Victorian architecture that was there before. So you could go all the way back to when it was residential, and I'm sure some of these properties will turn back into residential properties, but if they want to keep the shop front and improve the shop fronts, the principles that are set out in this guide, I think, work in many different property, in sort of across Reading, in terms of, you don't want a solid shutter which kind of turns your back on the street. You want to sort of look for what features have been covered up, and if they're next door, do we want to bring them back in? Not cover the windows with lots of stickers so you can't see, and it's really about trying to make it more welcoming, more attractive, and looking at the was the presence there in the architecture of the original architecture of the building. I don't know if that answers the question or just gone off left field, but
well, it doesn't really address my basic question, which is that these were not built as shops. I get it about covering up what original features still could be seen in some cases, but things like not extending fascia boards across more than one property are already in the new local plan. So it's not necessarily anything new. But anyway, thank you. Sorry, Claire, I didn't catch where you were from. Are you from the council?
I'm Purcell. I'm an architect, so I'm a conservation
Not
Purcell.
Yeah.
So
Sally
I mean,
also
these,
from Purcell.
yeah.
Yeah.
So this,
Okay.
I mean, this guide's obviously looking at shop fronts, and it touches very briefly on buildings being converted into residential. But you are right, some have been residential, and then for a long time are shops. But it's really concentrating on as the high street and the shops, and that kind of incarnation of these buildings and the principles of that.
Thank you.
But it can be something we add in. I mean, it's something that we can look into in terms of, especially looking at historical photographs of those before.
I think Councillor Rowland had her hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to add in really quickly. I mean, I think to Claire's point, Evelyn, the fact that so many of these have converted for such a long period, they carry that kind of shop front kind of appearance very much now, and the guidance in and of itself can point them back to those classical elements that can be incorporated. And as well, with the removal of a lot of, removal of a lot of permitted development and the increase of that, I'm sorry, there will probably be a return of some of these to housing. The going philosophy is in retail shop areas and high streets is that we've got about 30% too much. That's the kind of number that's been bandied about, 30% too much retail along our streets. And with the influx of housing, with those permitted development returns, we will start to see it changing, which is kind of what I was alluding to earlier. The high street will be evolving, and so we will see some of these returning to housing. But I think the ethos of classical design elements are in the Shopfront guide to enable them to should they, once they come to trying to do something about their shopfront, be able to find some good guidance in there.
Okay, I think Sarah had her hand up next.
Yes, I mean, everything that I was going to say has been said by Claire and by Councillor Rowland, but I wanted to add that there is some language in the design guide about making visible the residential features of the upper floors. So making sure where we have a fascia board that is too tall and it's obscuring kind of the bottom window sill, that's something we can quite easily ask of applicants. So, it is unrealistic in most cases to ask them to amend the ground floor to return it to a more residential appearance, but we can really focus on the upper floors in many of these cases.
Are there any other questions?
Yes, hello. So I've got a few reservations essentially with the heritage changes. So I think one of my kind of concerns is obviously that the ongoing costs and the long-term maintenance costs for, let's say, local businesses, if they were to go ahead with doing the refit. And secondly, as well, is I believe my tenant is a local business, so not necessarily one of those established chain companies. And I think they kind of more rely on kind of like a shop front dominance on the street. Having a look at some of your examples of your signages and stuff like that, I'll be honest with you, I'm not particularly feeling them. They don't present some kind of dominance on the street, which I think local businesses would rely on. So obviously, is there any kind of room for flexibility with that? And in terms of obviously the ongoing maintenance or the cost of the maintenance and stuff like that for any heritage looks and feels, how would that kind of add up in terms of for a local business person?
shall I answer that one? Start off with. So there's a few points you picked there in terms of the build and maintenance. So a lot of the materials that we've sort of been pushing forward is obviously primarily timber, which if good quality, sustainable sources and is maintained, will outlast any UPVC and metal system. But it does require looking after, so it does need to be repainted at least once every 7 years. So it's sort of, if you look after sash windows, they'll outlive 2 or 3 PVC windows, but they cost more to put in the first place. So it's a long-term approach, and it's a more environmentally sustainable approach. But that does mean putting up money to start off with, which is kind of a key reason why there's things like the Heritage Action Zones and grants available for certain areas through Historic England to help support that, with an understanding that a lot of businesses, especially with COVID, have been struggling and they need the help to get that going. So yes, if you look after the signs and the features of the timber frontage, it will outlast any of these modern ones. But there is an outlay cost, I can't deny that, most definitely so. The colours and signage, I appreciate that people want to kind of try and stand out from the crowd. I think there is flexibility with colours, and some of the examples which are more colourful, which Sally shows whether it has gone a bit further. I know that Historic England is hoping to have more of the dark tones, but I think there is opportunities to put a stamp of individuality, but try and work within some of the parameters set out. So in terms of, it doesn't mean you have to make everything, your signage deeper, you just need to make it kind of work with the proportions there, and then think about how to work with colour in your fonts and other bits to try and bring it out. And yeah, I think there's different ways to do it. The sketches that we should obviously bring back on, the historical features have been lost in terms of where stone arches and doorways have been messed about, and what happens with the upper floors, which is next to the shop. And I know that some of the shop owners and tenants obviously aren't in charge to have control of that part of the building, but we've looked at that in the round, so to speak. But yeah, it's, if you want good quality, it costs more money, but it should outlast a lot longer. And there is, with paint, much more flexibility, and lighting as well, more flexibility. But yeah, I suppose from where I'm standing, bigger isn't always better in terms of huge signs which cover up things, or cover the whole of the glass window, as opposed to be able to see into the shop. But I mean, this is why we're having these discussions. And if you think that it's too muted, that's good, that's helpful, because we want people to engage with this and to sort of go, yes, this is something that's useful to us. Does that help?
Yes, cheers. Thank you. Lovely.
Could I add something on that too? Just in terms for men perhaps to think about. And Evelyn had asked if we could put up some of those examples, maybe even of the Oxford Road that we currently have, and then some of the proposed examples. I think men to think
links to
about
those in the chat.
future-proofing as a collective in a destination area is really, really key. And I think that when you look at a jumbled long run of big, little, on and on and on, those large shop signs that they think that they need really just become a collective mess. And they fight each other, and no one actually winds up winning. When there is a more collective and a more homogeneous area, it draws the shops together in a collective way. It makes people want to be in that area because it's cleaner, because it's less cluttered, because it's more attractive. Therefore, that increases your footfall, which is a very integral part of shops and what they need to attract people to their shops. Indeed, so it's that examination of that big, small, fighting, brighter, this and that just kind of evolves into nothing, versus that collective kind of thinking of a longer run of shops and making it more of a destination that hopefully will actually be the way forward in the future. Shop owners and retailers are having to rethink how they're preparing for the future and having to look at the future. And this is kind of laying out a really positive approach, and something that has worked beautifully in many other towns. So I would just hope that maybe you could also think on that point too.
And Sarah, you had your hand up as well. Would you like to add something?
Yes, I was just going to encourage men to make a representation. So if you'd please make a formal representation during the consultation. It closes on the 24th of September. We're quite open to hearing suggestions for changes to the text that would allow for shop owners to have a bit more leeway, but still respect some of those heritage principles. And then also, just to reiterate what Councillor Rowland said, if we can get to a place where shop owners, all in a row are coming together at the same time to create a cohesive look, it won't feel, hopefully, that there's kind of an arms race going on with advertising and bright colors, and we'll achieve our objective that everyone has seen improved business together.
Yeah, no, Chairs, lovely. I will. Thanks for that. Essentially, yeah, my concerns were really kind of how we're going to balance this heritage look, plus also be protecting local businesses and also their income as well post-COVID. So I think it needs to have a good balance, instead of just always having this heritage look. And there's obviously, of course, about discussing in terms of the costs and long-term costs. But essentially, my tenant's not really raised anything in particular, but no, obviously will raise obviously in terms of the balance between the heritage look and protecting local businesses.
Thanks. We realise this might be done in increments as well, in terms of it's a lot of money to completely take out a shop front and replace it. So it might be, instead of replacing another metal or plastic fascia, you kind of say, actually, while we're up here, let's tidy up these cables, let's replace this fascia. Oh, there's a little bit of corbel there we was left over, let's redo that. So, and then at a later date, when other things are upgraded, it might be down to the windows and the doors. So, because it does cost a lot to do it in one bit. So it's just helping, hopefully, people think about the long term, but be able to make these incremental changes, which just sort of think about things in a slightly different way, but allow for this individuality, which is obviously key.
Is there anything further from anyone? We've probably not got a huge amount of time left. Anyone else want to raise anything?
Last question.
Yes, Richard, yes.
Do you know, with some of the proposed development, suppose we don't agree with some of it, are we okay to sort of say, look, can we amend it this way, or can we add or change part of what you're saying? Do we have a sort of input like that, or is it sort of structured your way and that's it? So, because there's on the plan on my building, there's some things I don't agree with, and I'd like to sort of perhaps maybe amend it at all.
So are you talking about the sketches for the High Street Action Zone, or are you talking about drawings and sketches within the document that Sally's just shown?
The sketches earlier with the uniformed shop fronts all together. There was
yeah,
I think, yeah, that's the one.
So the design guide is to help sort of owners and tenants and also the planners. So it's sort of saying sort of an agreement between both parties, if you like, that these are the principles, and if you do something along these lines, it will get consent and approval without there being clear justification why not. There obviously is always scope to to do things differently. It just needs to be worked out, clearly justified. And if it's not appropriate, you might get told no, and it will be rejected. So these are sort of this is a design guide to help kind of clear a pathway, if you like, so everyone kind of understands that this is what's understood as the principles moving forward, which will be consented, which will kind of bring back historic. I mean, obviously there is a strong heritage side on these ones because these are the buildings that move forward, but nothing saying this is the only way it has to be done. But you would need to have a much clearer set of information and clearer justification as to why you'd be doing it differently. That doesn't mean that it can't be done, but it might mean there's a much higher risk of rejection by the planners. But that's the choices and the decisions to be made moving forward. And I think that's where you have discussions with the architect, potentially with the pre-app, with the planners, and move forward. But these everyone's open to the discussion. There's no one solution to fix all. This is sort of a guide of principles, but it won't necessarily in its entirety fit every single property, if that makes sense. These guides are well, they literally are, they're guides. It doesn't mean it works everywhere in every single situation. It should help yourselves and architects and planners understand and all be on the same page most of the time, and hopefully help the process for all involved. But yeah, I think there is flexibility, but you have to have clear justification and clear information of what you propose, so that judgments can be made by the planners accordingly.
With the colours then, the colour schemes you've offered the tenants, is that it? We've got to go with that colour?
Not at all. No. This is.
I think these images here, this one here, is a sketch image of what could happen.
Yeah.
It's not
what must
design
happen.
that something's definitely going to happen. This is showing you an example, basically. As I understand it, individual building owners can come forward, and if they're interested in going ahead for the HAS funding and putting in some of their funding as well, they can go ahead and have designs drawn up more in more detail. But this is just a flavour to give an idea to people of what could happen.
Well, yes, definitely. So what that sketch is trying to show is where we're saying you've got a string course above the signage, which is kind of, you can see it again and in the proposals above. A lot of the doors to the upper flats had sort of stone surrounds and timber doors with fan lights. A lot of those have been lost for UPVC windows or metal windows or flat panel windows, and the stone has been damaged. So it's ideally we'd reinstate that in some forms, repair the stone and have a door with the fan light, and I'm sure they will vary slightly, but they won't be like UPVC or a flat panel door. They will vary, and actually variety is good, but it's just sort of similar, sort of within a sort of set of loose rules, if you like. It just looks better. One of those shops has an example of a bay window, which, because previously they were a series of bay windows, and these are actually an example of a rows of terraces which probably were originally houses with bay windows, as you see opposite it, and they've been changed into shops. Those shops will be, I'm sure, many different colours, and the awnings may be striped in all different colours as well. But they work within sort of a zone, if you like, of sort of where the fascias are and where the awnings are, which sits below the string course. We've tidied up the front. We haven't got 3 satellite dishes on each property kind of thing going on. But no, we're definitely not saying you have to have a blue painted shop front. No way. That's definitely not what we're saying. It's just sort of saying, look at some of the features that have been lost. Look at trying to bring back some of the proportions. Look at trying to reinstate the straw risers. Look at trying to create level access. Look at trying to improve the doorway up to the first floor, so it all sort of tidies up and just looks just much neater, much more upmarket, much tidier, and it's also just much more sustainable materials than plastic everywhere. But no, we're definitely not dictating that you need to have a green, a red, or a blue shop. It was just sort of indicative, saying this is one shop, this is another shop. Do you know what I mean?
Thank you so much.
No trouble at all.
Okay, Sarah's got her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, it would probably be best if we add some language to the SPD to clarify that a lot of these images are indicative. And I would also encourage any applicant to make sure that you're working with an accredited architect or an accredited conservation architect or heritage consultant if relevant. And the council also offers a pre-application service that is a bit more back and forth. It's a bit more iterative. So if you have some ideas that you maybe are not quite sure of and you want to run it by the council, there's a lower fee associated with that sort of feedback. You don't have to go for the full planning application and then risk it being rejected. So we're very happy to give feedback on proposals through a pre-application process as well.
Sarah, I was just going to add for Richard too. Richard, if you own a shop along the Oxford Road or anything like that, or you want to discuss any ideas further, as Sarah also said before, please feed into the process, but please also feel free to contact myself as one of the ward counselors down there in Abbey Ward. If you're in that area, I don't know if you are, but contact your local counselors or contact Sarah, or any of these guys, or myself to talk about it. I'm always happy to have a coffee and a chat about any of your concerns. What you're talking about are things that I would say you're probably not the only one that is going to sit down there and go, okay, is this going to be the way it is? And the council's sitting down there going, this is the way it is, and on, because there needs to be flexibility. That flexibility comes in the classical design. So if the word history scares you, concerns you, bothers you, and it can bother some people, classical elements are really the phrase that is going through here, and those are the kinds of things that are trying to be promoted through here. So I'm always happy to chat. I'll leave my email over there if you want to get in contact with me too. Be happy to chat.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
All right, I'm just conscious of time. I think we've run over just a little bit, but I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us. And if you have any further questions, feel free to email myself or Celine. And if you have a question that's specifically about the Heritage Action Zone, those questions are really best for Celine. And if you have any questions or comments about the document that we've discussed tonight, the SPD, then I can field any of those. And if there are no further comments or questions, I think we'll go ahead and sign off.
Thank you everyone for coming.
Right. Thank you everyone.